The moment I stepped into that cold, formal room, it wasn't just the tension that gripped me, it was the familiar sting of rejection. Everyone was there, dressed in black, eyes sharp, lips tight. But no one looked at me with sympathy. I wasn't just an outsider in that moment. I had always been one. I could see it in their glances. I didn't belong, not to them, not to this family, not even to the man lying lifeless in a coffin. When the lawyer began reading the will, every heartbeat sounded like a gavel, hammering down judgment. And then came Karen's voice, slicing through the silence like a blade. She'll get nothing. Dad hated her. There it was, plain, brutal, and unfiltered. A sentence that crushed more than my hopes for an inheritance. It annihilated the last thread of hope I had for acceptance. They didn't even try to hide their satisfaction. Their smirks weren't about money. They were about winning. To them, I was never the real daughter, never the one who fit. In their eyes, I was the reminder of a shameful past, a mistake never meant to be acknowledged. Even though I shared his blood, I was treated like a stranger crashing a sacred family gathering. What hurt most wasn't the lack of inheritance. It was the confirmation of everything I had feared growing up. The quiet moments when he ignored me. The absence at my school events. The empty seat beside me at church. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, in the end, he would choose to see me. But he didn't. And they made sure I knew that. I left that room not just empty-handed, but spiritually gutted. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was personal. It reaffirmed the lie I had believed for years. You're not wanted. You're not loved. You're not enough. But as painful as it was, that moment became a turning point. Sometimes, the deepest rejection forces us to confront the lies we've silently carried. And when the world strips you of every false identity, that's when God begins to whisper the truth. I didn't know it then, but what the world called humiliation, God would soon transform into healing. After the reading of the will, I didn't just walk away from the room. I carried it with me. The echo of Karen's voice, the looks of disdain, the unspoken verdict, "You're not one of us." It followed me home. It followed me into my sleep. It followed me into the mirror. I didn't know how deeply shame had rooted itself in me, until I found myself questioning everything. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really am unwanted. Maybe I was a mistake. I wasn't just humiliated, I was undone. Their rejection didn't just hurt my feelings, it shattered the foundation of who I thought I was. Shame is a quiet killer. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides behind achievements, behind smiles, behind "I'm fine." It twists your memories and redefines your worth through the lens of rejection. I began to see myself as they did, unwanted, inconvenient, illegitimate. I started shrinking in conversations, second-guessing my value, isolating myself not just from people, but from purpose. The humiliation I experienced became the narrative I lived by. You don't belong anywhere. This wasn't just an emotional wound, it was a spiritual identity crisis. I had allowed their rejection to write a false gospel over my life. Instead of hearing, "You are my beloved," I heard, "You are their burden." Instead of living out of divine adoption, I lived out of earthly abandonment. And slowly, the shame that others put on me became the shame I put on myself. But here's the dangerous thing about shame. It doesn't just lie about you, it lies about God. It told me that if they didn't love me, then maybe God didn't either. That maybe even He had turned His face away. That maybe I wasn't worth fighting for, even to Him. It wasn't until I stood at the edge of complete emotional collapse that I dared to ask the question that changed everything. God, who do you say I am? Not my father, not my family, not my fears, you. And when I finally stilled the voices of accusation, I began to hear a different voice. A gentle one. One that didn't echo the courtroom, but whispered from the cross. You are mine. The world told me I was a mistake, but grace told me I was chosen. They called me an outsider, but heaven called me daughter. It was in the rubble of rejection that Jesus began to rebuild my identity, not on shame, but on sonship. After shame took root in my soul, hiding became my survival. Not just hiding from others, but hiding from myself, from truth, from light. I learned how to smile without meaning it, to nod without agreeing, to keep busy so I wouldn't feel. I became a master of masks. I told myself I was just protecting my peace, but the truth was I was protecting my pain, hoarding it like a secret heirloom no one could steal because no one could see. Isolation wasn't just my condition, it became my comfort. I didn't trust people, not even the well-meaning ones. Because deep down, I believed if they knew the real me, the rejected one, the unwanted one, they'd leave too. So I built walls. Strong ones. Not physical, but emotional, spiritual. I stopped showing up for things that mattered. I turned down invitations with excuses that sounded holy. I'm in a season of rest. When really, I was just scared. I ghosted community. I avoided church. I even began to silence God's voice because I thought maybe even He was tired of my brokenness. And yet, in that darkness, something sacred happened. The very isolation I used to protect my heart became the stage where God began to pursue it. Not in lightning bolts or loud sermons, but in the quiet, in the stillness, in the tears I cried alone, in the journal pages stained with questions. I realized, Jesus doesn't wait outside our walls, He walks straight through them. He wasn't afraid of my hiding. He wasn't offended by my silence. He sat with me in the pain I didn't know how to process. He didn't demand a performance, He offered presence. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to pretend. I could be completely seen, completely known, and still completely loved. It was there, in isolation, that I discovered the difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness says, "You're forgotten." But solitude with Jesus whispers, "I'm right here." God began to peel back the layers of my hiding, not to shame me, but to heal me. He reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's worship. That healing doesn't start when we have all the answers. It begins the moment we invite Him into our questions. And as I slowly stepped out of hiding, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't made to live behind walls. I was made to be a temple, open, honest, filled with light. There's a sacred kind of courage that comes not with a roar, but with a whisper. Mine began the day I finally said it out loud. I'm not okay. It wasn't in front of a crowd. It wasn't at a conference or revival service. It was on a quiet evening, with a friend I barely trusted, when the mask slipped just long enough for honesty to break through. My voice trembled, but something in my spirit steadied. And in that moment, silence lost its power over me. For years, I had believed the lie that vulnerability was dangerous. That if I let anyone see the wounds, they'd judge me, or worse, leave. But what I found was the opposite. When I broke the silence, healing had permission to begin. Shame thrives in secrecy, but it dies in the light. And when my pain finally had a voice, it also found a witness. The first time I shared my story, I expected rejection. What I received was compassion. I expected awkwardness. What I received was shared tears. I expected to be labeled. Instead, I was embraced. God used that simple act of confession to start rebuilding me, piece by piece. I began to speak, and slowly, the lies began to unravel. The lie that I was too broken. The lie that no one would understand. The lie that I had to fix myself before I could be loved. Truth flooded in like sunlight through shattered glass. Healing didn't happen all at once. Some days, the silence still tried to pull me back. But now I had tasted freedom, and I knew its sound. It sounded like worship in a whisper. Like scripture clung to in the dark. Like friends who didn't offer quick fixes but simply stayed. Most of all, it sounded like Jesus, speaking over me what I had never believed I was worthy to hear. You are still mine. Breaking the silence didn't mean I had all the answers. It just meant I was done pretending I didn't have wounds. It meant I was ready to walk with a limp rather than die with a secret. There's power in confession, not for performance, but for connection. We don't confess to be pitted, we confess to be healed. And every time I spoke, I found another piece of my voice returning. Another layer of shame falling off. Another wall coming down. And I realized this, my silence had once been a prison. But my story, spoken raw, redeemed, was becoming a key. There is a beauty that only broken things know. A beauty that doesn't shine, it glows. Gentle, quiet, but undeniable. It is the beauty of being seen, and still being loved. After years of hiding behind shame, after the long nights of aching silence, after daring to speak out my pain, it happened. Not all at once, but like the slow rising of the morning sun after a night I thought would never end. God began to rebuild the ruins of my life, not into what it was, but into something far more beautiful. Redemption, I learned, isn't about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about God weaving it into a story that could only exist because it happened. The very thing I thought had disqualified me, the rejection, the wounds, the silence, became the place He showed His glory the most. I once asked God why He allowed me to walk through so much darkness. I'll never forget the whisper I sensed in my spirit, so others would know I can walk them out of it too. That was the moment I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a beacon. When God restores, He doesn't just patch the broken things, He resurrects them. He doesn't just silence the shame, He gives it a new name. Mine was restored, redeemed, beloved. No longer hidden. No longer defined by rejection. No longer afraid of being seen. And perhaps the most unexpected part of healing was this. I wasn't just seen by God, I was seen by people. Real people. People who didn't flinch at my story. People who called out the gold in me when all I could see was the ash. Community became sacred ground. Not perfect, but honest. Not always easy, but always worth it. Now, when I look back, I don't see a girl who was too far gone. I see a miracle. I see the fingerprints of grace on every chapter, even the ones I used to wish never happened. And I see others, dozens, hundreds, who hear my story and whisper, "Me too." That's the beauty of redemption, it multiplies. One life restored becomes a door for others to walk through. One voice healed becomes a song for the voiceless. One soul seen becomes a lighthouse for the ones still lost at sea. So now, I no longer fear being known. I rejoice in it. I no longer run from my story, I run with it. And every time I speak it, I am reminded, I am not who I was. I am not what they said. I am not what I once believed. I am His. And that changes everything. In the end, my story is not one of shame, but of glory, God's glory. What was once a scar became a testimony. What was hidden in fear now stands in the light of grace. Through rejection, I found belonging. Through silence, I found my voice. And through brokenness, I discovered a deeper beauty, to be seen, known, and still deeply loved by God. This is the power of redemption. Not just survival, but transformation. Not just healing, but purpose. My past no longer holds me captive. It has become the platform from which I declare, His love truly makes all things new.